if 95% means we can secure a tenant who can afford the tenancy, live there sustainably, eat the home, sort of heat it, afford to eat and generally be sustainable, that to me is better as a landlord than pushing drastically and constantly pushing. Either the tenant will fall into arrears or they'll move on. So that is sort of my ethos. That's the story I will sell new landlords who come to us. That's how we'll price properties and that's how we assess tenants. That said, what we often see of private landlords, we took a new instruction last week, long-standing tenants, really nice landlord who'd been immensely kind and not reviewed the rent for 5, 7, 8 years. The rent had fallen well behind. We will now go through that sort of a process of trying to find a fair schedule of rent increases that moves that tenancy back towards a market rent. But some of the reasons I would mention why it is wise to keep pace with market rent, maybe not go exactly to, but certainly not let the property fall too far behind. Firstly, the conversation is a good opportunity to check in with your tenant to see how they're doing financially. A bit like we talked about at the beginning, having that negotiation with your tenant and understanding where they are. But also, in terms of mortgaging, if you need to remortgage, they will stress test mortgage level against rent level. So we've had landlords who've struggled with their remortgaging because actually their rent has dropped so low that it doesn't meet the stress test. So that can be a risk. When properties come up for sale, we transact a lot of our deals with Patterson's where it's a tenanted property. But actually, if you present your property and the market and the rent has fallen away, all of a sudden your property is less desirable to the incoming investor. So ironically, that can cause landlords a problem. Landlords now want to exit, coming to us to bring their properties to auction, and their achievable price is affected by the rent they're getting. So that's something to bear in mind in terms of the rent you set and how often you look at your rent. And of course, let's be fair, it affects your ability to invest and repair the property. And if by being kind, by not increasing the rent, means that you don't have the funds to invest back in your property, that can drive other problems, frankly. So just some things to be aware of, because I think there is this perception from well-meaning landlords that actually we're doing the tenant a favour. And there is a balance, which, I think I've talked a lot about tonight, but allowing a tenancy to fall significantly below market rent can trigger all of these other problems. Not to mention one I've not put on there, which is when the tenant has to move on. So if the tenant then has to move on, what they find is their finances are completely out of kilter with the market. So actually, then they can't move on. So there's this whole host of problems where being overly kind can create chaos later. Don't go over the top, but I guess just bear all of these factors in mind. When you think you're being nice, you may actually be causing future problems for yourself and for your tenant. Referencing,